Water was already at Mara Ellison's knees when the engine of her car died for good. The road behind her had disappeared under a brown, moving river, and the road ahead was no better. Rain came down so hard it stung her face like tiny needles, and the wind pushed against her body as if it wanted her to fall. She had left her car 20 minutes ago, when the water started rising through the door, and now she did not know if she would ever see it again. Her phone had no signal. Her shoes were gone, lost somewhere in the mud. Her only thought was to keep moving before the water rose past her waist and swept her away like a leaf. She had grown up in this town, but tonight she did not recognize it. The streetlights were dead. The shops were dark shapes behind curtains of rain. Somewhere far off, a siren wailed, but it never came closer. She was alone, on a flooded street, at 11 o'clock at night, and every second told her that if she did not find shelter soon, she might not survive until morning. Then she saw it, a single light, glowing gold through the rain, high on a hill where the water had not yet reached. It came from a large old house at the edge of the woods, a house she had passed 100 times in daylight without ever really looking at it. Ivy climbed its stone walls. Its windows were tall and narrow, like eyes half closed. She had heard stories about that house when she was a child, whispers about a man who never left it, but right now, she did not care about old stories. She cared about light and dry ground, and a roof over her head. She pushed through the flood, fighting the current with every step, until the ground began to rise beneath her feet, and the water fell away to her ankles, then to nothing at all. By the time she reached the stone path leading to the house, her legs were shaking so badly she could hardly stand. She climbed the steps to the front door and pounded on it with both fists. "Please," she shouted, her voice cracking. "Please, is anyone home? I need help." For a long moment, nothing happened. The rain kept falling. The wind kept howling through the trees behind her. She began to wonder if the light she had seen was some kind of trick, a reflection, a memory of a house that had been empty for years. She raised her fist to knock again, and that was when the door opened. A tall man stood in the doorway, framed by warm candlelight behind him. He looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair, pale skin, and eyes so light gray they seemed almost silver in the dim light. He wore a plain white shirt, old-fashioned in its cut, and he studied her with an expression she could not quite read. Surprise, certainly. But underneath the surprise was something else. Caution, maybe even fear. "You should not be out in this," he said. His voice was calm and low, with a faint accent she could not place. "My car is gone," Mara said, shivering so hard her teeth clicked together. "The water took the road. I saw your light. Please, I just need somewhere dry until the storm passes." He did not answer right away. His gaze moved past her, out into the storm, as if he were checking for something, or someone. Then he stepped back and opened the door wider. "Come in," he said. Quickly. She stumbled across the threshold into warmth and stillness, and the door closed behind her with a heavy sound that shut out the storm almost completely. She stood there dripping on the stone floor, her whole body trembling, and looked around at the entrance hall. It was lit by candles in iron holders on the walls, dozens of them, casting a soft orange glow over furniture that looked like it belonged in a museum. A grand staircase curved upward into darkness. Old paintings hung on the walls, their subjects unfamiliar, their frames heavy with gold. "You are freezing," the man said. "There is a fire in the front room. Come." She followed him down a short hallway into a large room where a fireplace crackled with real flame, throwing dancing light across dark wood furniture and shelves lined with old books. He gestured to a chair near the fire, and she sank into it gratefully, pulling her wet arms around herself. "Thank you," she said. "I'm sorry to just show up like this. I didn't know where else to go." "You did the right thing," he said, standing near the door, keeping a small distance between them. "The flood took many of the low roads tonight. You are lucky you found higher ground before the water became worse." "I'm Mara," she said, because it felt strange not to introduce herself to the man who had just saved her life. He hesitated for a moment, as if deciding something. "Adrian," he finally said. "Thank you, Adrian. Really, I thought I was going to be stuck out there all night." "You may still be stuck here for a while," he said. The roads will not clear until morning at the earliest, and even then, it may take time for anyone to reach this part of town. He paused. I am afraid I do not have much to offer in the way of comfort. I do not usually have guests. Mara looked around the room again, noticing details she had missed at first. There were no electric lights anywhere, only candles. There was no television, no modern furniture at all. Everything looked old, but not worn out old. More like preserved old, as if time had simply stopped moving through this house, while it kept moving everywhere else. A large clock on the mantel ticked steadily, its hands carved from dark wood, its face yellowed with age. You live here alone? She asked. Yes, Adrian said, for a long time now. It's a beautiful house, she said, meaning it. I always wondered about it growing up. People used to say strange things about it. Something flickered across his face, there and gone so fast she almost missed it. People say strange things about houses they do not understand, he said. It is easier than asking questions. She did not know how to respond to that, so she simply nodded and held her hands closer to the fire. The warmth was beginning to seep back into her fingers, but her clothes were still soaked through, and she could feel a shiver working its way up her spine. You are still cold, Adrian said. He crossed to a wooden cabinet against the wall and opened it, revealing folded blankets and what looked like old but well-kept clothing. There is a room upstairs where you can change out of those wet clothes. I will find something dry for you to wear. It may not be modern, but it will be warm. I really appreciate this, Mara said. I don't want to be any trouble. You are not trouble, he said, and for the first time, something like a small smile touched the corner of his mouth. You are simply a person who knocked on a door during a storm. That is not trouble. That is just what people do when the world becomes dangerous. They look for light. He led her up the grand staircase to a bedroom on the second floor, small but comfortable, with a narrow bed and a wash basin, and a single tall window that looked out over the flooded valley below. He handed her a folded set of clothes, a long shirt and a pair of soft trousers that looked like they belonged to another century, and told her he would wait downstairs. Alone in the room, Mara peeled off her wet clothes and dressed in the ones he had given her. They smelled faintly of cedar and something else she could not name, something clean and old at the same time. She caught her reflection in the wash basin's still water and paused, surprised at how pale and tired she looked, her dark hair plastered to her head, her eyes wide with the leftover fear of the flood. When she came back downstairs, Adrian had set out tea on a small table near the fire, along with bread and cheese on a wooden plate. She had not realized how hungry she was until she saw the food, and she ate quickly, gratefully, while he sat across from her, watching the fire more than watching her. You didn't have to do all this, she said between bites. It is only bread and tea, he said. Nothing so grand. It's more than I expected from a stranger, she said. Most people would have just left me out there. Most people, Adrian said slowly, have not seen what happens to someone left out in a storm with nowhere to go. He looked into the fire, and for a moment, his expression grew distant, as if he were remembering something far away. I would not do that to another person. Not for any reason. Mara studied him as he spoke, trying to place his accent, trying to guess where he might be from, but nothing about him fit together the way people usually did. His words were formal, in a way that reminded her of old books, and yet his voice was gentle, almost sad. There was something lonely in the way he sat, something careful in the way he kept his distance from her, as though he were used to being alone and did not quite know how to be near another person anymore. Do you have family nearby? She asked. People who might worry about you being out here during a flood. No family, Adrian said. Not for a long time. That's a shame, Mara said gently. This house is too big for one person. It has been big for a long time, he said, and there was something in his tone that told her not to push further. She let the silence settle between them, comfortable despite the strangeness of the night, and outside the wind continued to howl against the old stone walls. She thought about her own life while she sat there, about her small apartment across town, about her job at the clinic where she worked as a nurse, about her friend Grace, who was probably worried sick right now, unable to reach her. She wanted to call someone, to let them know she was safe, but there was no signal here, And Adrian's house did not seem to have a telephone at all, not even an old one. "Is there any way to reach someone?" she asked. "My friend will be worried." "I am sorry," Adrian said. "I do not keep a telephone. I have never needed one." He saw the concern on her face and added, "When the storm passes and the water goes down, I will help you find a way into town. It should not be more than a day, perhaps 2 if the flooding is severe." 2 days. The thought of being stranded in this strange, beautiful, candlelit house for 2 days sent a small thrill through her chest, one she did not fully understand. She told herself it was only relief at being safe, only curiosity about a man who lived so differently from anyone she had ever met. But some small part of her recognized that it was more than that. There was something about Adrian, something quiet and sad and careful, that made her want to know more, even as every instinct told her that this house held more secrets than she could see in the candlelight. Outside, thunder rolled across the valley, and the fire popped and crackled in the silence that followed. Adrian rose to add another log to the flames, and as he moved, Mara noticed something strange. In all the time she had been in this room, she had not once heard him take a breath the way other people did, the small automatic sound of air moving in and out. She told herself it was nothing, a trick of the storm, a trick of her own exhausted mind after the terror of the flood. But later, when he passed by an old mirror hanging near the staircase, she glanced at it out of habit, expecting to see his reflection beside her own. The mirror showed only her. She blinked, certain she had imagined it, certain the candlelight was playing tricks on her tired eyes. When she looked again, Adrian was simply standing beside her, solid and real, his gray eyes catching the firelight, and the mirror behind him showed nothing but the empty hallway. A cold feeling moved through her chest, colder than anything the flood had given her. She pushed it aside, told herself she was tired, told herself the night had been too strange and too frightening for her mind to be trusted. Adrian offered her another cup of tea, his voice warm and steady, and she took it with hands that trembled only a little. Outside, the storm showed no sign of ending. And inside the old house on the hill, Mara Ellison sat by a fire with a man who cast no reflection and did not yet understand what she had walked into when she knocked on his door. The rain had not stopped by morning, though it had softened into a steady gray drizzle that tapped against the windows like patient fingers. Mara woke in the narrow bed upstairs, disoriented for a moment, until the memory of the flood and the strange house came rushing back to her. She lay still, listening to the quiet of the house, so different from the noise of her apartment near the main road. No traffic. No voices, only the soft patter of rain and, somewhere below, the faint sound of someone moving about. She dressed again in the old-fashioned clothes Adrian had given her, since her own were still wet from the night before, and made her way downstairs. She found him in the kitchen, a large room with a stone floor and a great hearth where a small fire burned low. He was arranging bread and fruit on a plate, and he looked up when she entered, offering her a small nod. "You slept well, I hope," he said. "Better than I expected," Mara admitted. "Considering everything, the flood has not gone down much," Adrian said, gesturing toward the window. Beyond the glass, she could see the valley below still covered in brown water, the tops of fence posts and mailboxes poking through like small islands. "I do not think anyone will be able to reach the road for another day, perhaps longer if the rain continues." Mara felt a flicker of worry, thinking of Grace, thinking of her shift at the clinic that she would now miss, but there was nothing to be done about it. She sat at the wooden table and accepted the plate Adrian offered her, filled with bread, soft cheese, and slices of apple. "Do you not eat?" she asked, noticing that he had prepared nothing for himself. "I ate earlier," he said smoothly, though something about his tone made her wonder if that was entirely true. "Please eat. You will need your strength if we are to check on your car later, once the water allows it." They spent the morning talking, and Mara found herself relaxing into the strangeness of the situation more than she expected. Adrian was an excellent listener, asking careful questions about her work at the clinic, about the town, about the small details of her ordinary life that she had never thought particularly interesting to anyone else. He seemed hungry for these details in a way she did not fully understand, as if ordinary life itself was something rare and precious to him. "You ask a lot of questions," she said at one point, smiling, "but you don't answer many of your own." I have lived a quiet life, Adrian said. There is not much to tell. That's hard to believe, looking at this house, Mara said. It feels like it has 100 years of stories in it. Something passed behind his eyes again, that same distant look she had noticed the night before. Perhaps it does, he said softly. Old houses collect things, memories, objects. People forget how much a house can hold, if it stands long enough. How long have you lived here? She asked. Longer than most, he said, which was not really an answer at all, but she let it go, sensing that pushing too hard might close a door that had only just begun to open. After breakfast, Adrian showed her through parts of the house she had not seen the night before, a library filled floor to ceiling with books in languages she did not recognize, a music room with an old piano that looked untouched by dust despite its age, a long gallery lined with portraits of men and women in clothing from many different centuries. She paused in front of one portrait, a young woman with dark curling hair and a gentle, sad smile, dressed in a style that looked at least 200 years old. Who is she? Mara asked. Adrian's expression grew quiet, careful. Someone I once knew, he said. A long time ago. She's beautiful, Mara said, studying the painting. There was something haunting about the woman's eyes, something that seemed to follow her even as she stepped to the side. You must have cared about her a great deal, to keep her portrait all this time. I did, Adrian said, and the simple honesty in his voice made Mara's chest tighten unexpectedly. He did not offer more, and she did not ask, though she found herself wondering about the woman in the painting for the rest of the morning, wondering what had happened to her, wondering why Adrian's voice had gone so soft and so sad when he spoke of her. As the day wore on, the rain continued without mercy, and the flood outside showed no sign of retreating. Adrian lit candles throughout the house as the gray afternoon light began to dim early beneath the heavy clouds, and Mara helped him where she could, carrying baskets of firewood, setting out plates for a simple dinner of soup and bread. Working alongside him felt oddly natural, as though she had known him far longer than one day, and more than once she caught herself smiling at some dry, quiet joke he made, surprised at how easily he could make her laugh despite the sadness that seemed to live somewhere beneath his calm exterior. That evening, they sat again by the fire in the front room, and Mara found herself studying him more closely than before. His skin was unusually pale, almost without color, yet it did not look sickly, only smooth and strange, like something carved from marble and given life. His eyes, when the firelight caught them just right, seemed to glow faintly, a trick of the light, she told herself, though it happened often enough that she began to doubt her own explanation. Can I ask you something strange? She said. Adrian looked at her with careful attention. You may ask me anything. Last night, by the staircase, I thought I saw something odd in the mirror, she said slowly, watching his face for any reaction. It's silly, I know. I was exhausted, and the candlelight plays tricks, but I could have sworn the mirror didn't show your reflection. For a long moment, Adrian said nothing. The fire crackled and popped between them, and the silence stretched out until it became almost unbearable. When he finally spoke, his voice was quieter than before, careful in a way that made her stomach tighten with unease. You are more observant than most, he said. What does that mean? Mara asked, a small thread of fear beginning to weave itself through her curiosity. It means, Adrian said slowly, that there are things about me that are difficult to explain, and even more difficult to believe. I did not expect you to notice so quickly. Most guests I have had over the years never stayed long enough to notice anything at all. Most guests, Mara repeated. How many guests have you had exactly? Adrian's gray eyes held hers, steady and unblinking, and something in his gaze made the hair on her arms rise. Fewer than you might think, he said, and none in a very long time. Mara felt her heartbeat quicken, though she was not entirely sure if it was fear or something else entirely, some strange pull toward the mystery sitting across from her. She thought about leaving, about finding some way out into the flooded night despite the danger, but the truth was that there was nowhere to go, no road that was not underwater, no way to escape the storm outside except by staying exactly where she was. Are you going to tell me what's going on? She asked, keeping her voice as steady as she could manage. Because I think I deserve to know, considering I'm stuck here with you. Adrian studied her for a long moment, as if weighing something important, some decision that had been building inside him since the moment she had knocked on his door. Finally, he rose from his chair and walked slowly toward the window, looking out at the rain-soaked darkness beyond the glass. "There is a room in this house," he said quietly, "that I have not shown you. A room I keep locked, because what is inside it explains more than words ever could." He turned back to face her, his expression unreadable in the dim firelight. "I think, perhaps, it is time you saw it, if you are certain you wish to know the truth." Mara's heart pounded in her chest. Fear and curiosity tangled together so tightly, she could not separate one from the other. Every instinct told her to say no, to stay by the fire where things still felt normal, where the strangeness of the house could still be explained away by tiredness and imagination. But another part of her, a part she did not fully understand, wanted nothing more than to follow this quiet, sad, careful man into whatever truth waited behind that locked door. "Yes," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I want to know." Adrian nodded slowly, and something like relief passed across his face, mixed with something that looked almost like fear of his own. He held out his hand toward her, an old-fashioned gesture, formal and careful, and after a moment's hesitation, Mara rose from her chair and took it. His hand was cool to the touch, cooler than any living hand should be, and the coldness of his skin sent a fresh wave of unease through her chest. But she did not pull away. She let him lead her out of the warm, firelit room and down a narrow hallway she had not noticed before, toward a door at the very end, its wood dark with age, its iron lock heavy and old. Outside, the storm raged on, indifferent to the truth that waited just beyond that door, a truth that would change everything Mara thought she understood about the world, and about the strange, gentle stranger who had opened his home to her during the worst flood in years. The lock gave way with a heavy metallic click, and Adrian pushed the door open slowly, as if he were opening it for the first time in years rather than simply unlocking it. Cool air drifted out from the room beyond, carrying a faint smell of old paper and dust. He lit a candle from the hallway and stepped inside, and Mara followed close behind him, her pulse thudding in her ears. The room was smaller than the others in the house, but every wall was covered floor to ceiling with shelves, and every shelf was filled with objects that seemed to span an impossible amount of time. There were framed photographs, old and new, black and white and color, all showing the same face, Adrian's face, young, unchanging, appearing again and again across decades of images, standing beside people in clothing that shifted from old-fashioned gowns to simple modern dresses, from horse-drawn carriages to automobiles, from candle-lit rooms to rooms lit with electric bulbs. Mara moved slowly along the shelves, her hand trembling as she picked up one photograph after another. A faded picture showed Adrian standing beside a group of soldiers in uniforms she recognized from history books about wars fought a century ago. Another, older still, showed him in a formal portrait alongside a woman in a wide-skirted dress, the kind worn hundreds of years earlier. In every single image, his face was exactly the same, not aged by a single day, not changed by a single line or gray hair. "This isn't possible," she whispered, setting the photograph down with shaking hands. "I know how it looks," Adrian said quietly from the doorway, watching her with careful, sad eyes. "I know it seems impossible, but it is true, Mara. Every photograph in this room, every letter, every object, belongs to a life I have actually lived." She turned to face him, her mind racing to find some rational explanation, some trick of family resemblance, some elaborate joke. But looking at his face in the candlelight, at the same pale skin and same silver-gray eyes she had seen in photographs dating back further than she could comprehend, she felt the last of her disbelief crumbling away. "How is that possible?" she asked, her voice barely steady. "How can you look exactly the same in a photograph from over 100 years ago?" Adrian stepped further into the room, his expression heavy with something that looked like the weight of centuries. "Because I have not aged in nearly 600 years," he said simply. "I was born in a small village, a very long time ago, in a time you would only know from history lessons. I lived an ordinary life for 23 years, and then, during a terrible sickness that swept through my village and killed almost everyone I loved, something happened to me. Something changed me. I did not die with the others. Instead, I became something else. Something that does not age. Something that does not need to breathe the way you do, or eat the way you do, though I can do both if I choose. Something that must avoid sunlight, and mirrors do not hold my reflection, as you already noticed. Mara stared at him, her mind struggling to accept what he was telling her, even as every strange detail of the past 2 days arranged itself into a clear and undeniable pattern. The candles, instead of electric lights, the missing reflection. The way he never seemed to eat a full meal, only picked at food to be polite. The coolness of his skin. The way his eyes seemed to catch light in a way no human eyes should. "You're saying you're a vampire," she said slowly, the word feeling strange and impossible in her mouth. Like something out of an old story. "I know how it sounds," Adrian said. "I have had 600 years to think about how strange it sounds, and it has never once become easier to say out loud." He moved to a nearby shelf and picked up an old, worn book, its leather cover cracked with age. "This was mine, from before. My original life, before everything changed. I kept it because it is the only thing I have left of the person I used to be." Mara took a step back, her thoughts spinning too fast to settle on any single feeling. Fear was there, certainly, cold and sharp beneath her ribs. But so was something else, something she could not fully name, a kind of aching sympathy for the man standing in front of her, a man who had watched everyone and everything he had ever known disappear into the past, while he remained exactly the same, frozen in time, alone in an old house at the edge of a town that had grown and changed around him for centuries. "Should I be afraid of you?" she asked quietly, watching his face for any sign of danger, any hint of the monster she had read about in old stories. Adrian's expression grew pained, and he set the old book back on its shelf with careful, gentle hands. "I would never hurt you," he said, his voice low and steady, filled with a sincerity that reached something deep inside her chest. "In 600 years, I have made every choice I could to avoid causing harm to another person. I do not take life. I have found other ways to survive, ways that do not require what the old stories claim. I understand, if you cannot believe that. I understand if you wish to leave this room and never speak to me again. But I needed you to know the truth, because I could not bear the thought of continuing to hide it from someone who has been kind to me, even for a single night." Mara studied him for a long moment, searching his pale face for any hint of deception, and finding none. Everything about him, from the careful way he stood at a distance from her, to the sorrow etched into every line of his expression, spoke of a man exhausted by centuries of loneliness, rather than a creature hungry for harm. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "You could have let me leave in the morning without ever knowing." "I could have," Adrian admitted. "It is what I have done with every other guest who has ever found their way to my door over the years. I send them on their way and let them forget, and I return to my solitude, exactly as I have for centuries." He paused, and something vulnerable crossed his features. Something that made him look, for just a moment, less like an ancient immortal being, and more like a lonely, frightened man. "But something about you made me want to be honest, Mara. I do not fully understand it myself. Perhaps it has simply been too long since I allowed myself to speak the truth to anyone." The honesty in his voice settled something in her chest, some of the fear easing into a cautious, careful curiosity. She looked around the room again, at the decades upon decades of evidence surrounding her, at a life stretched far beyond anything she could imagine, and she felt something shift inside her, some door opening toward understanding rather than fear. "Tell me about her," Mara said softly, nodding toward a photograph on a nearby shelf, showing the same dark-haired woman from the portrait in the gallery. "The woman in the paintings. Who was she to you?" Adrian's expression grew distant and sorrowful, and he crossed the room slowly to pick up the photograph, holding it gently, as if it might break apart in his hands. "Her name was Clara," he said quietly. "I knew her many years ago, in a different century entirely. She was the only person I ever told the full truth to, before you. She accepted me despite what I am, and for a short time, I believed I might finally have found a way to live a life that did not feel so unbearably lonely." "What happened to her?" Mara asked gently, though some part of her already dreaded the answer. "She grew old," Adrian said simply, his voice heavy with old grief. As all people do, I watched her live a full life, and I watched her grow gray, and eventually, I watched her pass from this world, while I remained exactly as I am now, unchanged, unable to follow her. It was the hardest thing I have endured in 6 centuries of existence, and after her, I made a promise to myself. I would not allow myself to grow close to another person again. It was easier, I told myself, to remain alone than to endure that kind of loss a second time. Mara felt her heart ache at the quiet sorrow in his voice, at the weight of a loneliness so vast she could hardly begin to comprehend it. She thought of her own small worries, her own small fears, and they suddenly seemed impossibly tiny next to the burden this man had carried for hundreds of years. "And yet you're telling me all of this?" she said softly, "breaking your own promise." Adrian set the photograph back down carefully and turned to face her fully, his silver gray eyes holding hers with a quiet intensity that made her breath catch in her throat. "Yes," he said, "I am." They stood there together in the small, candlelit room, surrounded by centuries of evidence of a life beyond ordinary understanding, and outside, the storm continued to rage against the old stone walls of the house, indifferent to the truth that had just been spoken between them. Mara did not know, in that moment, whether she should be more afraid of the ancient being standing before her, or of the strange, undeniable pull she felt toward him, despite everything she had just learned. What she did know, with a certainty that surprised her, was that she was not ready to leave. Not yet. Not until she understood everything there was to understand about the man who had opened his door to her during the flood, and who had just opened something far deeper and more dangerous than his front door by telling her the truth. Neither of them noticed, in that quiet, candle-lit moment, the faint shift in the air outside the house, a subtle change in the storm that had nothing to do with wind or rain. Somewhere beyond the flooded valley, something old and dangerous had begun to stir, drawn by a presence it had not sensed in this quiet corner of the world in a very long time. Neither of them spoke for a while after leaving the locked room, and Mara found herself needing time to simply sit with everything she had just learned. Adrian led her back to the front room, where the fire had burned low, and he added fresh wood without a word, letting the flames build back into a comfortable warmth while she settled into her chair, her mind still spinning with questions. "Ask me anything," Adrian finally said, sitting across from her, his hands folded carefully in his lap. "I imagine you have many questions, and I would rather answer them honestly than have you sit there wondering in silence." Mara considered where to even begin. There were so many things she wanted to understand, so many pieces of an impossible puzzle scattered across 6 centuries of existence. "How do you survive?" she asked finally. "If you don't do what the old stories say vampires do, then how have you lived this long?" "There are other ways," Adrian said carefully, "ways that do not require taking a life, or even causing serious harm. I have learned, over a very long time, how to sustain myself without becoming the monster people imagine when they hear the word vampire. It was not always easy to find that way. In my early years, before I understood what I had become, I made mistakes I am not proud of. But for centuries now, I have lived according to a strict code, one that allows me to exist without becoming the thing that haunts children's nightmares." "That must have taken a lot of strength," Mara said quietly, watching the firelight play across his pale features. "More than you know," Adrian admitted. "There were times, especially in the early years, when the hunger nearly broke that resolve. But I found that the longer I held to my code, the easier it became, and eventually it simply became who I am. Not a creature ruled by hunger, but a man who happens to carry an unusual burden." Mara thought about this for a long moment, watching him carefully. "Do you get lonely?" she asked. "Living this way, for so long?" Something shifted in Adrian's expression, a rawness she had not seen before. "More than I can properly express," he said. "Imagine watching everyone you have ever cared for grow old and pass away, again and again, while you remain exactly as you are. Imagine watching the entire world change around you, new inventions, new ways of living, new generations rising and falling, while you alone remain fixed in time, unable to move forward with any of it. It is a particular kind of loneliness that few people could ever understand, and fewer still would believe if I tried to explain it. I think I'm starting to understand a little, Mara said softly. At least, I'm trying to. Adrian looked at her with something like gratitude, and for a while, they simply sat together in comfortable silence, the fire crackling steadily between them. Eventually he began to tell her stories from his long life, carefully at first, testing her reaction, and then with growing openness, as he saw that she listened with genuine fascination rather than fear. He told her about the terrible sickness that had taken his village and changed him forever, about the confused and frightening early years when he did not understand what he had become. He told her about traveling across countries that no longer existed under the same names, about learning languages that had since faded from common use, about watching great wars unfold from a careful distance, unable to die in them the way ordinary soldiers did, forced instead to watch history happen again and again, while never truly being part of it in the way he once had been. He told her about the invention of things she took completely for granted, the first time he saw an automobile roll down a dirt road, the first time he heard a voice come out of a radio, the strange wonder of watching the world transform itself over and over throughout the centuries. Mara listened to all of it with wide eyes, captivated not just by the impossible scope of his experiences, but by the quiet, careful way he told each story, as though every memory carried its own particular weight of joy and sorrow combined. "It sounds incredible," she said at one point. "Frightening, but incredible too. You've seen more of history than any book could ever teach." "There are days when it feels like a gift," Adrian admitted, "and there are days, many more of them, when it feels like a punishment. I have outlived everyone I have ever loved, Mara. Every friend, every companion. I have buried people whose names most of the world has long since forgotten, while I remain here, unchanged, watching new names take their place." "Is that why you live alone now?" Ara asked. "Because it hurts too much to lose people?" "Yes," Adrian said simply. "After Clara, I decided it was safer, kinder even, to remove myself from the world of the living as much as possible. It is easier to bear loneliness than it is to bear loss, again and again, without end." Mara reached out then, an instinctive gesture, and placed her hand gently over his. His skin was cool beneath her fingers, but she did not pull away, and neither did he. "I'm sorry," she said quietly. "That sounds like an unbearable way to live." Adrian looked down at her hand resting over his, and something in his carefully guarded expression softened, cracked open just slightly, revealing the depth of feeling he had kept hidden away for so long. "It has been," he admitted. "Until recently, I had made peace with that unbearable way of living. I had convinced myself it was the only way to survive without breaking apart entirely. But sitting here with you, tonight, I find myself questioning that peace for the first time in a very long while." The words hung between them, warm and dangerous, and Mara felt her heart quicken in a way that had nothing to do with fear. She studied his face in the firelight, the careful sadness in his silver-gray eyes, the centuries of loneliness etched into every quiet gesture, and she felt something inside her chest ache with a tenderness she had not expected to feel toward a man she had only just met. A man who was not, by any ordinary measure, even entirely human anymore. "I'm not scared of you," she said softly, surprising herself with how true the words felt as she spoke them. "I was, at first, but not now. Not after everything you've told me." "You should still be careful," Adrian said gently, though his hand turned slightly beneath hers, an answering gesture, cautious but real. "I am dangerous, even if I do not intend to be. There are things about my existence that could put you at risk, simply by being near me." "What kind of things?" Mara asked, a flicker of unease returning at the seriousness in his tone. Adrian's expression grew troubled, and he glanced toward the window, where rain still streaked down the dark glass. "I am not the only one of my kind who has walked this earth," he said carefully. "Over the centuries, I have encountered others like myself, some who share my code, and others who do not. There is one in particular, a man far older and far more dangerous than I am, who has crossed my path more than once over the years. He does not share my restraint. He takes what he wants, whenever he wants it, and he has always resented me for choosing a different way." Mara felt a chill move through her that had nothing to do with the cold outside. Do you think he's nearby? She asked. I do not know, Adrian said. I have not sensed his presence in many years, but creatures like us can sometimes feel echoes of one another across great distances, particularly when something unusual disturbs the world around us. He paused, his silver eyes flicking briefly toward the window again, a subtle wariness entering his posture. A flood such as this, unusual weather, unusual movement in a quiet town, these things can sometimes draw attention from those who might otherwise never have noticed this place at all. You think the storm might have brought him here? Mara asked, her earlier fear returning in a different, sharper form. I do not know for certain, Adrian said. It is only a feeling, nothing more. But I have learned over 6 centuries to trust such feelings. I would ask that you remain close to the house for the remainder of your stay here, Mara, and that you avoid wandering too far from the light, even once the floodwaters recede. Mara nodded slowly, absorbing this new layer of danger on top of everything else she had learned that night. The storm outside seemed suddenly less like an inconvenience, and more like a warning. A wall of water and wind separating her from a world that no longer felt entirely safe, even within the walls of this strange and beautiful house. Will you be able to protect us, if he does come? She asked quietly. Adrian's jaw tightened, and something hard and determined flickered behind his sorrowful eyes. I will do everything in my power to keep you safe, he said, his voice low and steady, carrying a weight of promise that settled deep in Mara's chest. I have survived encounters with him before, and I do not intend to lose what I have found tonight, however fragile, and however new it may be. Outside, the wind picked up again, rattling the old windows in their frames, and somewhere far off in the flooded darkness, a sound echoed through the valley that was not quite thunder, and not quite anything Mara could easily explain. Adrian rose from his chair, moving to the window with the quiet, careful grace of a man who had survived far too many dangers to count, and stared out into the storm with an expression that told Mara, more clearly than any words could, that the danger he feared might already be closer than either of them wanted to believe. The sound came again, closer this time, a low, rolling noise that did not match the rhythm of the storm at all. Mara rose from her chair, joining Adrian at the window, and together they peered out into the darkness, where rain still fell in heavy sheets across the flooded valley below. For a moment, she saw nothing but water and shadow, the world outside reduced to shifting gray shapes beneath a black sky. Then she saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the tree line, far below the house, motionless, despite the wind and rain, battering everything around it. Even from this distance, something about the stillness of that figure sent a wave of dread through her chest, an instinctive warning that whatever stood there was not simply a stranded traveler caught in the flood. Is that him? She whispered. Adrian's body had gone rigid beside her, every muscle tensed, his silver eyes narrowed as he studied the distant figure. Yes, he said quietly, and the single word carried more weight than a lengthy explanation ever could. His name is Edmund. We have known each other for a very long time, though calling him a friend would be far from accurate. What does he want? Mara asked, though some part of her already suspected the answer. He has always resented my restraint, Adrian said, not taking his eyes off the distant figure. He believes it is a weakness, a foolish sentimentality that will eventually be my undoing, and now, sensing that I have allowed someone close to me again, someone I clearly care for, he will see it as an opportunity, a chance to prove his point, or worse, a chance to take something from me simply because he can. Mara felt fear coil tightly in her stomach, but beneath it, something steadier began to form as well, a resolve she had not expected to find in herself. What do we do? She asked. We wait, Adrian said. The floodwaters are still too high for him to cross easily, even for one such as him. That buys us time, though not as much as I would like. I need you to stay inside the house, Mara, no matter what you see or hear. The house itself carries certain protections, old ones, built into its very stones by those who came before me. He cannot simply walk through the door uninvited. And if he tries anyway? Mara asked. Adrian's expression darkened, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw something fierce and dangerous beneath his careful, gentle exterior, a glimpse of the centuries of survival that had shaped him into someone capable of enduring far worse than a single stormy night. "Then I will stop him," he said simply. "Whatever it takes." They watched the distant figure for a long while, but it did not move, did not attempt to cross the rising water separating it from the house. Eventually, Adrian pulled the curtains closed, cutting off the view, though the tension in the room remained as thick as ever. "Tell me about him," Mara said, sitting back down near the fire, though she found it difficult to fully relax, now that she knew what waited beyond the walls. "How do you know each other?" Adrian settled into the chair across from her, though he remained alert, his gaze occasionally flicking toward the curtained window. "We were made in similar circumstances, many years apart, by creatures of our kind, who no longer walk this earth," he said. "Edmund was already old when I encountered him for the first time, perhaps 2 centuries into my own existence. He found my restraint amusing at first, then irritating, and eventually something he seemed determined to challenge at every opportunity. We have crossed paths many times over the centuries, in many different countries, and it has never ended well between us." "Has he ever hurt you before?" Mara asked. "More than once," Adrian admitted, "and I have done the same to him, when necessary. We are close enough in strength that neither of us has ever managed to end the other permanently, though we have both tried, at various points in our long history." He paused, his expression growing troubled. "What concerns me now is not my own safety, but yours. Edmund does not share my restraint regarding human life. If he decides that hurting you would wound me more deeply than confronting me directly, he will not hesitate." The fear that had been simmering in Mara's chest sharpened into something closer to genuine terror, but she forced herself to breathe steadily, to think clearly, despite the danger pressing in from outside. "Then we need a plan," she said. "We can't just wait here for him to make the first move." Adrian looked at her with something like surprise, and then, slowly, something like admiration. "You are remarkably calm for someone facing this kind of danger," he said. "I'm terrified," Mara admitted honestly, "but panicking won't help either of us. What can we do to protect ourselves until the water goes down enough for help to reach us?" Adrian considered this for a long moment, his mind clearly working through possibilities built from centuries of hard-won experience. "The house has certain defenses," he said finally. "Old wards worked into the foundation stones, protections passed down from those who taught me how to survive in the earliest years of my existence. They will hold against casual intrusion, but Edmund is patient, and he is old enough to know how to work around such defenses, given enough time." He paused. "There are certain items in this house, tools I have gathered over the centuries, specifically in case a confrontation like this ever became necessary. I had hoped never to need them again." "What kind of tools?" Mara asked. "Things that can weaken one of my kind, even one as old as Edmund," Adrian said. "I will need time to prepare them properly. In the meantime, I need you to promise me you will not leave this house, under any circumstances, no matter what you hear or see outside." "I promise," Mara said, though the fear in her chest made the words feel fragile, even as she spoke them. Adrian rose and moved toward a hidden panel near the fireplace, one Mara had not noticed before, concealed cleverly within the ornate woodwork. He pressed something, and the panel slid open, revealing a narrow compartment lined with objects that looked ancient and purposeful, small vials of dark liquid, strange metal implements, and a collection of what appeared to be old, carefully preserved herbs, bundled together with twine. "These have kept me alive through encounters far worse than this," Adrian said, gathering the items carefully. "I had hoped to never need them again, but I am grateful, now, that I never discarded them." As he worked, preparing whatever defenses he could manage before the flood receded enough to allow Edmund a clear path to the house, Mara found herself watching him with a strange mixture of fear and admiration. Here was a man who had survived 6 centuries of loneliness and danger, who had faced threats she could barely imagine, and who was now working tirelessly to protect a woman he had only just met the night before, a woman who had done nothing more than knock on his door during a storm. "Why are you doing all this for me?" she asked quietly, watching him arrange the strange collection of protective items near the front door. "You barely know me." Adrian paused in his work and turned to look at her, his silver eyes catching the firelight in a way that made her breath catch in her throat. "Perhaps that is exactly why," he said softly. "In 600 years, I have rarely allowed myself to feel anything as strongly as I have felt in these past 2 days with you. I do not fully understand it myself, but I know that I would rather face Edmund 1,000 times over than allow any harm to come to you now." The words settled deep in Mara's chest, warm and frightening in equal measure, and outside, the storm continued its relentless assault against the old stone walls, while somewhere beyond the flooded valley, a patient and dangerous figure waited for the water to recede, watching the house on the hill with eyes that had witnessed centuries of darkness, and were now fixed with cold, calculating interest on the light glowing steadily within it. Hours passed in tense preparation. Adrian moved through the house with purposeful efficiency, placing small bundles of dried herbs above every window and door, tracing symbols Mara did not recognize onto the stone thresholds with a dark, ink-like substance from one of the old vials. She helped where she could, though most of what he did required knowledge she simply did not have. Centuries of learning compressed into careful, practiced movements. "Will this be enough?" she asked, watching him finish the last of the markings near the kitchen door. "It will slow him," Adrian said, straightening up and studying his work with a critical eye. "It will not stop him entirely, not if he is determined enough. But it may buy us the time we need until the water drops low enough for you to reach safety, or until help arrives from town." As if summoned by his words, a new sound reached them from outside, distinct from the rain and wind, a low mechanical hum that grew steadily louder. Mara moved to the window and carefully parted the curtain, spotting a set of headlights cutting through the darkness on the road below, moving slowly along the section of higher ground that had begun to emerge as the water receded slightly. "Someone's coming," she said, relief flooding through her. Adrian joined her at the window, his expression more cautious than relieved. "It may simply be someone checking on residents after the flood," he said, "but it could also draw Edmund's attention, or worse, put whoever is in that vehicle directly in his path." The vehicle, an old truck with a searchlight mounted on top, made its way slowly up the hill toward the house, clearly following the higher ground that had become passable as the water dropped. Mara recognized the truck after a moment, relief washing through her chest. "That's Daniel," she said. "He works with the town's emergency service. He must be checking on residents in this area." "Do not go outside," Adrian said quickly, gripping her arm gently but firmly. "If Edmund is still nearby, I do not want you exposed, even for a moment." The truck pulled to a stop near the base of the hill, and a figure climbed out, shining a flashlight up toward the house. Mara recognized Daniel's familiar shape even at this distance, and she felt a fresh wave of worry for his safety, now that she understood what might be lurking somewhere in the darkness beyond the tree line. "I need to warn him," she said. "If Edmund is out there, Daniel could be in danger without even knowing it." "I will go," Adrian said firmly. "It is safer for me to face whatever is out there than for you to risk it. Please, Mara, stay inside. I promise I will return." Before she could argue, Adrian moved toward the front door with a speed that seemed almost unnatural, disappearing out into the rain before she could stop him. Mara pressed herself against the window, watching anxiously as he made his way down the hill toward Daniel's truck, his pale figure a stark contrast against the dark, waterlogged landscape. She watched the two men exchange words she could not hear, Daniel gesturing toward the flooded road behind him, clearly explaining that most of the surrounding area remained impassable. Adrian glanced repeatedly toward the tree line, his posture alert and tense, clearly searching for any sign of the danger he knew was lurking somewhere in the darkness. Then, without warning, a shape moved at the edge of the trees, fast and fluid in a way that made Mara's breath catch in her throat. She watched, horrified, as the figure she now recognized as Edmund closed the distance toward the truck with impossible speed, and she saw Adrian react instantly, placing himself between the approaching threat and the unsuspecting Daniel, who had clearly not yet noticed anything wrong. Mara's heart pounded as she watched the confrontation unfold from the window, too far away to hear what was being said, but close enough to see the tension in every line of Adrian's body as he faced down a threat centuries in the making. Edmund was tall, taller than Adrian, with dark hair and an expression of cold amusement even from this distance. The kind of casual cruelty that made Mara's skin crawl, despite the glass and distance separating them. Words were exchanged, sharp and clearly hostile, even without sound, and then Edmund's gaze shifted, moving up toward the house, toward the window where Mara stood watching. Even from that distance, she felt the full weight of his attention settle on her, cold and calculating, and instinctively, she stepped back from the glass, though she knew it was already too late to hide from whatever he had already seen. Down below, Adrian's posture shifted into something more defensive, and Mara watched with growing horror as the confrontation seemed on the verge of turning violent. Daniel, finally sensing that something was deeply wrong, backed toward his truck, his hand moving toward the radio mounted on his dashboard, though Mara doubted whatever help he might call for could arrive in time to matter. Then, just as quickly as he had appeared, Edmund stepped back, his cold expression shifting into something almost playful, a predator toying with prey, rather than moving in for an immediate strike. He said something more to Adrian, gestured once toward the house, and then melted back into the darkness of the tree line as quickly as he had emerged, leaving Adrian standing alone in the rain, his shoulders tense with barely contained fury and fear. Mara rushed to the front door, throwing it open despite her earlier promise to stay inside, and hurried out into the rain to meet Adrian as he made his way back up the hill. Behind him, she could see Daniel's truck pulling away, retreating back down the flooded road, clearly shaken by whatever he had witnessed, even if he did not fully understand what it meant. "What happened?" Mara asked, pulling Adrian into the shelter of the doorway. "What did he say to you?" Adrian's expression was grim, his silver eyes darker than she had seen them before. "He knows about you," he said quietly. "He saw you in the window, and he understood immediately what you mean to me, even after only 2 days. He has given us until tomorrow night before he returns, a courtesy he claims to be extending out of respect for our long history together, though I suspect it is simply because he enjoys the anticipation of what is to come more than the act itself." "What happens tomorrow night?" Mara asked, though she feared she already knew the answer. "He intends to test whether my restraint truly means anything," Adrian said, his voice heavy with old, weary anger. "He believes that if he threatens something I care about deeply enough, I will finally abandon the code I have held to for centuries, and become exactly the kind of creature he has always insisted I secretly am. He wants to prove a point more than he wants to cause simple harm, though the harm itself would certainly satisfy him as well." Mara felt fear settle deep in her chest, but beneath it, something fiercer began to burn as well, a refusal to simply become a pawn in a centuries-old conflict she had never asked to be part of. "Then we use tonight and tomorrow to prepare properly," she said firmly. "You said you have tools, defenses. We use every single one of them, and we make sure that whatever he's expecting tomorrow night, he doesn't get it." Adrian looked at her with something like wonder, the fierce determination in her voice clearly surprising him, even after everything they had already been through together. "You continue to surprise me," he said softly. "Most people, faced with a threat like Edmund, would have fled the moment they understood the danger." "I'm not most people," Mara said, meeting his gaze steadily, despite the fear still coiled tightly in her stomach. "And besides, I'm not going anywhere until this is settled. You've protected me since the moment I knocked on your door. It's time I helped protect you too." Outside, the rain continued to fall, though it had begun to soften into a lighter drizzle, a sign that the worst of the storm might finally be passing. But inside the old house on the hill, a different kind of storm was only just beginning to build, one that would test the limits of 6 centuries of careful restraint, and would demand from both Mara and Adrian a courage neither of them had fully understood they possessed until this moment. The next day passed in careful, focused preparation. Adrian moved through the house with renewed purpose, reinforcing every ward, strengthening every protection he had learned across centuries of hard experience. He explained each step to Mara as he worked, teaching her what she needed to know, not because he expected her to fight Edmund directly, but because he refused to leave her helpless if anything went wrong. "These will not stop him completely," Adrian explained, showing her a small pouch filled with dried herbs bound in silver thread, "but they can weaken one of my kind if used correctly. If anything happens to me tonight, if I am unable to protect you myself, you throw the contents of this pouch directly at him, and run for the cellar. There is an old door there that leads to a tunnel beneath the house, built generations ago by those who first taught me how to survive. It will take you down to the creek bed, away from the house entirely. Nothing is going to happen to you, Mara said firmly, though the fear in her chest made the words feel more like a desperate hope than a certainty. I intend to make sure of that, Adrian said, but I would rather you be prepared regardless. As evening approached, the rain finally stopped entirely, leaving behind a heavy stillness that felt more unsettling than the storm itself had been. The floodwaters had receded enough that the road below the house was passable again, though Adrian insisted it was still too dangerous for Mara to attempt leaving, not with Edmund's promised return looming over the coming darkness. They sat together in the front room as the sun set behind heavy clouds, neither of them speaking much, the weight of what was coming settling over them both like a physical presence. Mara found herself studying Adrian's face in the dim light, memorizing the careful lines of worry etched across his pale features, the quiet strength beneath his obvious fear. I need you to know something, she said softly, breaking the silence between them. Whatever happens tonight, I don't regret knocking on your door. I don't regret any of this, even knowing what I know now. Adrian turned to look at her, something raw and vulnerable moving across his expression. 2 days ago, I was a man who had convinced himself that solitude was not just necessary, but preferable, he said quietly. You have undone 600 years of careful isolation in less time than it takes most people to fall properly in love, and I find that I do not regret it either, whatever the cost of tonight might be. Before Mara could respond, a sound broke the stillness outside, footsteps on the stone path leading up to the house, unhurried and confident in a way that made her blood run cold. Adrian rose immediately, his entire body tensing with alert readiness, and moved toward the front door with the careful, measured steps of a man preparing for a battle he had fought many times before. Stay behind me, he said quietly, and remember everything I taught you. He opened the door before Edmund could even knock, and the two ancient beings faced each other across the threshold, the tension between them thick enough that Mara could feel it pressing against her skin, even from several steps back. Edmund's cold eyes swept past Adrian, finding Mara immediately, and his lips curled into a smile that held no warmth whatsoever. You look well, old friend, Edmund said, his voice smooth and cultured, carrying an accent even older and stranger than Adrian's. And I see you have found yourself a new companion. How refreshingly predictable. You are not welcome here, Edmund, Adrian said, his voice hard and steady despite the danger radiating from the man before him. Leave now, and we need not resolve this the difficult way. Come now, Edmund said, his cold smile widening. You know that is not why I have come. I simply wish to see how deep this newfound devotion of yours truly runs. Will you finally abandon your precious restraint to protect her? Or will you stand by your code, even as I take from you the one thing that might finally make your endless existence bearable? You will not touch her, Adrian said, his voice dropping into something low and dangerous, a tone Mara had not heard from him before, one that spoke of centuries of buried strength finally rising to the surface. Edmund's expression shifted, amusement fading into something colder and more focused, and without warning, he moved, faster than Mara's eyes could properly track, closing the distance toward the doorway in a single fluid motion. Adrian met him head-on, and the two ancient beings collided with a force that sent both of them crashing back across the threshold and into the entrance hall, the impact shaking the old house down to its very foundations. Mara stumbled backward, watching in horror as the fight unfolded with impossible speed, Adrian and Edmund trading blows that would have shattered ordinary bone in an instant, their movements blurring together into something almost too fast to follow. She remembered the pouch clutched tightly in her hand, remembered Adrian's careful instructions, and she forced herself to stay steady despite the terror gripping her chest. Edmund gained the advantage briefly, driving Adrian back against the old staircase with a force that splintered the ancient wood, and in that moment, Mara saw her opening. She rushed forward, throwing the contents of the small pouch directly at Edmund's face, the dried herbs and silver threads scattering across him in a fine cloud that made him recoil with a hiss of pain and surprise. The distraction was enough. Adrian surged forward, using the brief opening to drive Edmund back through the shattered remains of the staircase railing, and out through the open front door, back into the cold night air. Mara followed cautiously to the doorway, watching as the two figures grappled on the stone path outside. Adrian's strength renewed by fierce determination, Edmund's confidence visibly shaken by the unexpected resistance he had encountered. "You have grown soft," Edmund snarled, struggling against Adrian's grip, clinging to a human who will be gone within the span of a single lifetime, while you remain exactly as you are. "Perhaps," Adrian said, his voice steady despite the exertion of the fight. "But even a single lifetime spent caring for someone means more than 6 centuries spent alone out of fear. You have never understood that, Edmund, and I suspect you never will." With a final surge of strength, Adrian forced Edmund back toward the edge of the hill, where the ground dropped steeply toward the creek below, still swollen with floodwater from the storm. Edmund's cold composure finally cracked entirely, fury, and something like genuine fear crossing his features, as he realized the position he had been forced into. "This is not finished between us," Edmund spat, before wrenching himself free of Adrian's grip and disappearing into the darkness with unnatural speed, retreating down the hill and vanishing among the trees, leaving behind only the fading echo of his angry, promising words. Adrian stood alone on the hill for a long moment, breathing heavily despite not truly needing the air, watching the darkness where his old adversary had disappeared. Then he turned back toward the house, toward Mara, who stood in the doorway with tears of relief and fear mixing together on her face, and the exhaustion and worry in his expression finally broke into something like tentative hope. "Is it over?" Mara asked, rushing forward to meet him as he climbed back up the hill. "For now," Adrian said, pulling her carefully into an embrace, mindful of his own strength even in his exhaustion. "Edmund is proud. It will take time for him to recover from this humiliation, time before he considers returning. It may not be over completely, not for a very long while, but tonight, we are safe." They stood together outside the old house as the clouds finally began to break apart overhead, revealing patches of clear night sky scattered with stars that had been hidden by the storm for days. Mara looked up at Adrian, at the careful relief and quiet wonder in his silver eyes, and felt something settle deeply and permanently in her chest, a certainty that whatever came next, whatever dangers still waited somewhere in an uncertain future, she did not want to face it apart from him. "What happens now?" she asked softly. "For us, I mean." Adrian looked down at her, his expression thoughtful, careful, and for the first time in longer than he could easily remember, genuinely hopeful. "I do not know," he admitted. "I have spent 600 years believing that solitude was the only safe way to exist. You have shown me, in the span of a single storm, how wrong that belief truly was. I cannot promise you an easy life, Mara, not with threats like Edmund still somewhere in the world, and not with the particular burden of what I am. But I can promise you that I will not let you face any of it alone, if you are willing to stay." Mara thought of her small apartment across town, of her ordinary life before the flood had swept her onto this unexpected path, and found that she did not miss it, not really, not compared to the strange and beautiful possibility standing in front of her now. "I'm not going anywhere," she said firmly, echoing words she had spoken once before, though this time with far greater understanding of everything those words truly meant. Behind them, the old house stood weathered but unbroken against the clearing night sky, its candle-lit windows glowing warmly, despite the battle that had just been fought within its walls. The floodwaters continued to recede in the valley below, slowly revealing the ordinary world Mara had left behind 2 nights earlier, a world that now felt impossibly distant compared to the extraordinary path she had chosen to walk instead. She had knocked on a stranger's door during a flood, seeking nothing more than shelter from a storm. She had found, instead, 600 years of history, a danger she never could have imagined, and a love that defied every ordinary rule she had ever understood about the world. As dawn began to break gently over the horizon, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and pink, Mara Ellison stood beside Adrian on the hill above the flooded valley, ready to face whatever extraordinary future awaited them both, together.